How many of us are looking for natural ways to stay sharp and keep our mood balanced as we get older? Depression and cognitive decline affect millions worldwide, yet simple dietary interventions often go overlooked. What if something as accessible as mushrooms could genuinely support your mental clarity and emotional well-being across your entire lifespan? Today, we're exploring the science behind an important new review that examines exactly this question. This is Mushroom Science from the Source, explained simply by Benjamin Ashpole of NourishCap.com. More than 280 million people globally experience depression in any given year, and cognitive decline affects growing populations worldwide, particularly as we age. The conventional pharmaceutical approach often leaves people wanting more, with many treatment-resistant cases where standard medications simply don't work effectively enough. At the same time, lifestyle factors including diet play increasingly recognized roles in brain health, yet we often underestimate how simple foods can support our neurocognitive function. This brings us to mushrooms. Mushrooms are fungi, and many contain bioactive compounds that have documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. In plain terms, these are substances that reduce cellular damage and calm the body's inflammatory responses. But do they actually translate to real benefits for your mood and thinking abilities? A comprehensive review published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews examined this very question by analyzing 34 different human studies across varying ages and health conditions. The central finding is both encouraging and complex. Large-scale population studies typically show that eating more mushrooms is associated with better moods and sharper minds. Yet, controlled intervention trials often produce mixed results. We'll explore what this gap means, which mushrooms show the most promise, and what experts recommend right now as the picture continues to clarify. The review identified 24 large epidemiological studies. These are studies that follow hundreds of people and track their eating patterns against health outcomes. These studies paint a clear picture. Individuals who regularly consume any species of mushroom demonstrate significantly better cognitive performance compared to those who rarely or never eat mushrooms. This benefit appears in healthy populations, in middle-aged adults, in older adults, and even in people already dealing with health challenges or cognitive concerns. The mood benefits were equally consistent. Across the studies examined, higher mushroom consumption correlated with lower rates of depression and anxiety symptoms. One particularly important finding emerged from dose-response analysis, meaning researchers looked at whether eating more mushrooms created more benefit. Individuals consuming roughly 20 grams or more of fresh mushrooms daily showed the highest cognitive scores across multiple domains, including memory, processing speed, and executive function. This is an easily achievable intake, the kind that could fit naturally into an ordinary weekly meal plan. The consistency across these large population studies is striking. We're talking about thousands of individuals tracked over extended periods across different countries and cultures showing the same pattern. Mushrooms and better brain function go together. However, and this is where the story becomes nuanced, when researchers moved from observation to intervention, when they actually gave people mushrooms or placebos and carefully measured outcomes, the results became far less consistent. The review found only 10 rigorous intervention trials where researchers controlled conditions precisely. These studies tell a different story than the observational data. Why would that be? Several factors contribute to this divergence. First, the intervention studies were generally small, typically including 30 to 100 participants rather than thousands. Small studies have less statistical power. They're less likely to detect real but modest effects. Second, the studies use different cognitive tests, mushroom species, doses, and intervention lengths. Some gave mushrooms for just a few weeks, others for several months. Some used highly purified extracts, others used whole dried mushroom powder. This variability makes it genuinely difficult to draw firm conclusions. Despite this mixed picture, certain patterns did emerge. The species most commonly investigated was lion's mane mushroom, scientifically known as Hericium erinaceus. In the trials that examined this particular species, researchers generally did observe some enhancement of mood and some improvements in cognitive measures, particularly in middle-aged and older adults. The effects were typically modest rather than dramatic, but they were present in most studies examining this species. When researchers looked at blood tests of study participants, they found a correlation between better memory and mental clarity and higher levels of a compound called ergothioneine. Ergothioneine is an antioxidant naturally concentrated in lion's mane and certain other mushroom species. These results were particularly prevalent in people over age 50 and especially in those experiencing early cognitive decline. The takeaway from this intervention evidence is not that mushrooms don't work. It's that we need better designed, longer duration studies with larger participant numbers to be more certain about exactly when and how they provide benefits. Understanding why mushrooms might support brain function requires looking at what makes them neurologically active. Mushrooms synthesize and accumulate several types of bioactive molecules. The primary mechanisms appear to involve three pathways. First, the antioxidant pathway. The brain, despite being only about 2% of body weight, uses roughly 20% of the body's oxygen. This high metabolic demand creates significant oxidative stress, essentially byproducts that accumulate and can damage cellular structures. Certain mushroom compounds neutralize these damaging byproducts, protecting neural tissue. Second is the anti-inflammatory mechanism. Chronic inflammation in the brain is increasingly recognized as a driver of depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Mushroom bioactives suppress this inflammatory response, allowing normal neural signaling to proceed more effectively. This is particularly important because depression appears to involve distinct inflammatory pathways, and reducing this inflammation appears to ease depressive symptoms. Third, certain mushroom compounds like erinaceins and hericinones, found particularly in lion's mane, seem to support the growth of new neurons and the formation of new connections between existing neurons, processes called neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. These are not just theoretical benefits. Researchers using specialized imaging can actually visualize increased dendritic spine density, the connection points between neurons, following lion's mane consumption. Additionally, many mushrooms provide serotonin precursors and contain compounds that influence serotonin availability in the brain. Serotonin is central to mood regulation, and many antidepressant medications work by increasing serotonin signaling. Mushrooms achieve similar effects through entirely different biological mechanisms. What makes mushrooms distinctive is the breadth and potency of their bioactive profile and their historical integration into food systems across multiple cultures. In Asian countries where mushroom consumption is habitual and represents a greater proportion of the diet, researchers have documented particularly robust relationships between mushroom intake and cognitive preservation with aging. How does this review align with what we're discovering about other functional foods and nutraceuticals for brain health? The picture is becoming increasingly coherent. According to a 2021 review in Frontiers in Psychiatry, mushrooms are framed as promising but still preliminary tools for conditions like depression and end-of-life anxiety, with downstream improvements in sleep as a secondary outcome rather than a primary target. This convergence matters because it suggests these aren't anomalies or statistical artifacts. It's a coherent body of evidence pointing toward genuine dietary influences on brain aging and mood regulation. The specificity differs. Lion's mane appears particularly relevant for cognitive function, while oyster mushrooms showed mood benefits in some studies, but the overall direction remains consistent across research programs. The findings also align with emerging understanding about the gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication between intestinal bacteria and the central nervous system. Mushroom polysaccharides, which are complex carbohydrates abundant in mushroom cell walls, appear to modify gut bacteria composition in ways that support better cognitive function and mood regulation. This additional pathway may explain why whole mushroom consumption sometimes shows benefits that isolated compounds do not. For people working in health and wellness who want to incorporate accurate, evidence-based claims about mushrooms, several truthful statements emerge directly from this research. Regular mushroom consumption is associated with better cognitive performance in aging adults, particularly for memory and executive function, according to large-scale studies. Lion's mane mushroom has shown modest benefits for mood and cognitive function in some clinical trials of middle-aged and older adults. Mushroom compounds contain documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that may support brain health. Consuming approximately one or more portions of mushroom per week has been associated with measurably better cognitive test performance in older adults. What people should avoid: making claims about cure or prevention of specific diseases, suggesting mushrooms are a substitute for medical treatment, or overstating effect sizes. The evidence supports associated with and may support language far more strongly than definitive claims about disease prevention or cognitive restoration. The authors of this review offer clear guidance on what comes next. Further acute and chronic human intervention studies are needed, using larger sample sizes than most current trials employ. We need hundreds of participants, not dozens. These studies should employ appropriately sensitive neurocognitive tests, meaning assessments specifically designed to detect the kinds of cognitive changes mushrooms might produce, rather than crude or insensitive measures. Importantly, researchers should investigate a wider range of dietary mushrooms. Most intervention trials have focused heavily on lion's mane, yet the epidemiological data suggest common culinary mushrooms, button mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, cremini, may also support brain health. Comparing these alongside more expensive specialty varieties would help identify which mushroom types offer the best evidence-supported benefits at practical price points. The duration of interventions requires expansion. Most current trials run 4 to 16 weeks. Brain aging and cognitive change operate on different timescales. Multi-year intervention studies would provide far clearer answers about whether mushroom consumption genuinely slows cognitive decline or simply produces acute improvements that fade. Equally important is the standardization of mushroom interventions. Different studies use different cultivars, growth conditions, drying and storage methods, and extraction techniques. This variability, while reflecting real-world diversity, makes meta-analysis and comparison between studies extremely challenging. Future research should coordinate on standardized mushroom preparations while still testing multiple varieties. Finally, researchers should integrate biomarker assessment more systematically. Measuring plasma ergothioneine levels, inflammatory markers, oxidative stress markers, and neuroimaging changes would help establish whether proposed biological mechanisms actually occur in humans. The most sophisticated studies would combine cognitive testing with biomarker assessment and neuroimaging. Here's what we've covered today. Mushrooms contain bioactive compounds with documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Large epidemiological studies analyzing thousands of individuals consistently show that people who eat mushrooms regularly demonstrate better mood and sharper cognitive function, particularly in memory, processing speed, and executive function. The relationship appears dose-responsive, with consumption of one or more portions weekly showing the clearest benefits. When researchers have conducted controlled intervention trials, results have been mixed, but studies investigating lion's mane specifically have generally shown modest benefits, particularly for mood and cognitive function in middle-aged and older adults. The divergence between observational and intervention evidence suggests we need larger, longer, more carefully designed trials before drawing firm conclusions. The biological mechanisms are sound and increasingly well understood. Antioxidant protection against oxidative stress, suppression of neuroinflammation, support for neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, and modulation of neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin. These aren't speculative benefits. They're mechanisms now confirmed across multiple research programs. Looking forward, the field needs expansion of intervention research using larger samples, longer durations, more diverse mushroom species, and better integration of biomarker assessment. The current evidence suggests that regular mushroom consumption can reasonably be considered part of a brain-healthy dietary pattern, particularly for aging adults concerned with preserving cognitive function and supporting mood regulation. If you benefited from this video, then please support more by subscribing to our collaborative education newsletter at NourishCap.com. Recently, YouTube has removed channels that discuss mushrooms without warning, forcing creators to start over from scratch. See this video's description for a link to join NourishCap's email newsletter, which will ensure your access to our upcoming videos, citizen science projects, and courses. NourishCap.com's free newsletter also teaches you about a beneficial gourmet, functional, medicinal, or practical mushroom each week. I'm Ben Ashpole from NourishCap.com. Take care and much love.